Hello, friend, and welcome back to Couch Tales. This is relationship real talk wrapped in friendly advice, but definitely not a substitute for professional counseling. I'm your host, Aaliyah, and today we're talking about something many couples face, but few discuss openly: mismatched needs in relationships, particularly around physical intimacy. Let me tell you about my friend Sarah, not her real name, of course. Sarah called me last week in a state somewhere between frustration and guilt. She's been dating Michael for about 5 months, a wonderful guy she met through mutual friends. They connect on so many levels. They both love hiking, have the same taste in obscure documentaries, and can talk for hours about everything from politics to pasta recipes. But there's been a growing elephant in the room. Sarah finally gathered her courage and told Michael something really important to her. She doesn't feel fully connected in a relationship without physical intimacy. Michael, who's 57, has been experiencing some, let's call them technical difficulties in that department. "I feel terrible," Sarah told me. "Am I being shallow? But also, shouldn't I be honest about what I need?" The conversation that followed was like watching two people trying to navigate a maze blindfolded while speaking different languages. Michael felt inadequate and defensive. Sarah felt guilty but also frustrated. They both left feeling worse than when they started. Sound familiar to anyone? Maybe not this exact scenario, but the dance of trying to communicate our needs while not hurting someone you care about. It's basically Relationship 101, and somehow none of us got the textbook. What Sarah experienced is what relationship experts call an intimacy mismatch, and it's way more common than most people realize. A study by that famous sex researcher from Indiana, not the bearded Vienna couch doctor, but the one who shocked 1950s America by actually talking about what happens in bedrooms, found that nearly 80% of long-term couples experience some form of desire discrepancy at some point. Sarah called me the next day with an update that made me both laugh and wanted to give her a high five. "His voice sounded so nervous when he answered," she told me. "But then the strangest thing happened. Once we could actually hear each other, the whole conversation changed." Michael explained that his situation was medical, not a reflection of his attraction to her, and that he'd been avoiding the topic out of embarrassment. Sarah was able to express that intimacy for her wasn't just about the physical act, but about feeling desired and connected. By the end of the call, they were actually laughing together about how badly their first conversation had gone, and more importantly, they started brainstorming solutions together rather than seeing it as her problem versus his problem. So what's actually happening in our brains and bodies when we face these intimate mismatches? Let's break it down in a way that won't make your brain hurt. Number one, there's what psychologists call attachment needs, our deep-wired craving for secure connection. That famous British doctor who studied how babies bond with their caregivers found that our early experiences shape how we seek closeness and handle rejection throughout life. For many people like Sarah, physical intimacy isn't just about the physical sensations. It's a primary way they experience emotional security. When that's missing, it triggers ancient attachment alarms in the brain. That's your neurological wiring doing exactly what evolution designed it to do. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes perfect sense. For our ancient ancestors, they were survival strategies. Different signals of commitment and connection would have helped our ancestors know their partner was invested in the relationship. Some needed physical closeness, others needed resource sharing, others needed verbal reassurance. Sound familiar? That relationship counselor from the 90s, definitely not Freud, who wrote about the 5 different ways people express and receive love, was onto something. We're all walking around with slightly different connection circuits. What's fascinating about Sarah and Michael's story is how they navigated from conflict to problem solving. When they switched from texting to actually talking, they tapped into what neuroscientists call co-regulation, the way human nervous systems literally sync up during voice and face-to-face interaction to promote bonding and understanding. That famous California researcher who studies emotion found that we pick up on subtle emotional cues in voice that texts completely miss. Sarah told me she could hear vulnerability in Michael's voice that made it impossible to stay frustrated at him. The really interesting part is what happened next. Once Sarah and Michael started talking openly, they realized they had different primary intimacy languages. Yes, I just made that term up, but I think it works. Michael expressed closeness through thoughtful gestures and quality time, while Sarah, she prioritized physical touch and affirming words. Neither approach is wrong, they're just different paths to the same destination: connection. Sarah and Michael's story had a pretty great update. They didn't magically solve everything in one conversation, but they did start seeing a couples counselor who specialized in intimacy issues. Sarah told me last week that they're discovering all kinds of ways to feel connected that neither had considered before. It turns out that there are many more ways to be intimate beyond the obvious, she told me, and some of them are actually more connecting than what I thought I needed. So what can we learn from Sarah and Michael? A few things. Number one, mismatched needs aren't a sign of relationship doom. They're completely normal. Number two, hard conversations are better had in person. Number three, what looks like a physical intimacy issue is often actually about attachment and emotional connection. And number four, the goal isn't perfect alignment, but understanding and creative problem solving together. So if you're facing a mismatch in your relationship, whether it's about intimacy, communication styles, or how clean the kitchen needs to be, try approaching it with curiosity instead of criticism. Ask questions like, what does this mean to you? And how does this make you feel? Instead of focusing only on behaviors. All right. That's it for today's episode of Couch Tales, Why We Do What We Do. I'm your host, Aaliyah. If you like this episode, please take a moment to follow, subscribe, and share it with a friend who might need some relationship insight, or just a good story about someone else's awkward moments. Until next time, friend, stay curious, stay kind, and remember that sometimes the most intimate thing you can do is just listening to understand.